Hi, it's Sylvester, and I wanted to talk a little bit about my anxiety because I have diagnosed generalized anxiety disorder, and well, frankly, I don't talk a lot about my anxiety because I don't feel like I have that much to say about it because so many people are diagnosed with generalized anxiety disorder that it just feels really common, and like most people are aware of what generalized anxiety disorder is like and what it does, and so I don't feel like I have a lot to offer to the conversation. I don't have a lot to say that hasn't been said a million times by a million other people. But today I'm having an anxiety day, and so I just wanted to talk about that a little bit, I guess. Now, my anxiety has been much better since my medication was adjusted last year. Around the end of August, early September of last year, I was hospitalized, and while I was in the hospital, they adjusted my medication, and that medication turned out to be quite good. I found a good cocktail of medication that really helps me with my mental health problems, and especially my anxiety, because before I was hospitalized, my anxiety was so bad I could barely get through the day. It was extreme anxiety. It was probably the most anxiety I've ever had in my entire life, and it was worse in the mornings, but it was something that it would last all day. I'd just wake up anxious, go to bed anxious. I was just so anxious about everything all the time, and it was really hell. Like, honestly, genuinely, it was hell. If you have generalized anxiety disorder, you might understand what that feels like. But like, I have had generalized anxiety disorder presumably my entire life. I've just always been a very anxious person, but I didn't get diagnosed until 2018. And even then, my anxiety wasn't as bad as it was last year in 2024. In 2024, my anxiety was the worst it's ever been. It was just so bad. I can't even put into words how bad it was. Again, it was hell. It was absolute hell. And my doctor kept prescribing me different medication and changing out my medications and putting me on higher doses of my medication, and nothing seemed to really be working. And so he gave me lorazepam, which actually did really help, but I was only allowed to have it 3 days out of the week because it's so addictive, and my doctor didn't want me to become addicted to it, so I was only allowed to have the lorazepam 3 days of the week, and so for 3 days out of the week I would be okay, but then every other day I was suffering. And so it got really, really bad. And if you don't know, I tried to commit suicide at the end of August of last year, partially with lorazepam. I saved up a bunch of lorazepam and took it all at once, and also a bunch of sleeping pills, and I tried to overdose, and it didn't work. Obviously, I'm still alive, as you can tell. But I'm no longer allowed to have lorazepam, which is understandable. But part of the reason why I tried to commit suicide was because of the anxiety. It was just absolutely unbearable. I was just so scared. Like, I know anxiety and fear are different, but it's kind of like occupies a similar part of the brain. You know, like I wasn't just. It didn't just feel like everyday anxiety. It felt like fear. Like, I was terrified of the things that might happen, terrified of everything. You know, it wasn't just anxiety, it was terror, it was fear. At least that's what it felt like, or at least that's the closest way I know how to describe what it felt like. And like I said, you might understand what I mean. If you're somebody who has an anxiety disorder, then you probably, like, I was having panic attacks basically every single day. It was really, really bad. And so I'm very grateful that my anxiety is much more under control than it used to be. But every so often I have an anxiety day. I'm still more anxious than the average person, I would say. And I feel like, this might be in my head, but I feel like people get mad when I say that I'm an anxious person, because I, in theory, don't have that much to be anxious about. You know, most people my age have children and families and relationships they need to maintain and stressful jobs they have to work. And like, a lot of people are very, very anxious. Anxiety is a very common thing in our society. And they, like, if I sit here and say that I'm very anxious, chances are the person watching this is going to think, well, I'm also anxious, because everybody's anxious. That's just kind of a fact of life. Everybody's anxious, you know? And so for me to sit here and say that my anxiety is worse than the average person's, first of all, makes it into a competition, and people like to win. So when people feel like I'm trying to compete with them, it's like, no, my anxiety is worse than yours. And so they need to kind of invalidate my anxiety in order to validate theirs in some way. But also, again, I feel like a lot of people don't think I deserve to be anxious because I don't have that much to be anxious about, in theory. But the thing about generalized anxiety disorder is that anxiety doesn't always make sense. It's not always rational. And in fact, the definition of the disorder is that it's a disorder. So it's like, it's not really rational. And although it feels rational to me to be anxious about all of the stuff that I'm anxious about, it really, it isn't that rational. You know what I mean? Like, yeah, it's, I don't know. I don't know. I'm having an anxious day, and I don't entirely know what to do about it, other than make a video and talk about it, because that's how I process things. I just like to talk through my feelings on the internet. I mean, I also journal when I don't feel like making a video, which is helpful, but I feel like when I go back and read my journal, it's just so much anxiety. Like, every journal entry is like, so today I'm anxious about this, and this. And then the next day I journal and it's like, today I'm anxious about this, and this, and I'm still anxious about the things I was anxious about yesterday, you know? And so it gets kind of old just talking about how anxious I am every single day. And like I said, my anxiety has gotten a lot better thanks to the medication I'm on, but I feel like I still don't know necessarily how to cope with my anxiety. I know that if I get really anxious, there's breathing techniques I can do. I know that just simply not thinking about the things that make you anxious is a way to cope with being anxious. It's very similar to how I cope with my anger. I feel like anger management is similar to anxiety management in a lot of ways. And so I try to use the skills I've learned to cope with my anger to try to use those skills to cope with my anxiety as well. But it is one of those things where it just doesn't always feel like the ways I cope with it are effective. Like, even making this video, I know isn't really helping in any way. As soon as I stop recording this video, I'm just going to go back to being very anxious. And in fact, as I'm making this video, I'm anxious. Like, it's not like making this video has caused the anxiety to go away. It's just making me less aware of it because I'm focused on making a video instead of focusing on the anxiety. But still, like, I know that this isn't necessarily helping. And even like breathing techniques, distraction techniques, like, oftentimes those don't even work that well. And so it's like, I don't really know what to do when I have bad anxiety days. I just kind of have to power through and remind myself that it's not going to last forever, and that hopefully tomorrow will be a better day, you know? And I'm not saying that I'm having a bad day, because it's a bad anxiety day, but that doesn't mean that it's a bad day. I feel like it's not necessarily a good day. Like, nothing has happened today that really has made it especially good, but nothing has happened today that has made it especially terrible either. And so I don't like saying that I'm having a bad day unless it's like really bad. You know, it's like when you're at the hospital or the doctor's office and they ask you to rate your pain out of 10. Unless you're in a hell of a lot of pain, you're not going to say the pain is at 10. You know what I mean? And so if 10 is like a really, really, really bad day and 1 is a really, really, really good day, then today's probably like a 6 or a 7. Like it's not really that bad of a day. It's just, it could be better. It could be, I could be having a better day. But again, hopefully tomorrow's a better day. Hopefully tomorrow my anxiety is not as bad. Only time will tell. And in the meantime, I'm just going to try to not think about the things that make me anxious. Although it is kind of a catch-22, because the thing about being anxious, the thing about anxiety is that even though a lot of times it's irrational and excessive when you have an anxiety disorder, sometimes anxiety serves a purpose, and sometimes you should listen to your anxiety because it's trying to tell you something important. Like if I'm anxious about having to see the doctor about something, for example, then sitting here being anxious about it might actually serve me some good, because I might flush out those plans a little bit and think about how I'm gonna get to the doctor, and like I don't know. I don't know. Like sometimes sometimes being anxious about something causes you to think about it a lot, and then that causes you to be better prepared for it, I guess. So if I'm anxious about getting bad news from my doctor, if I think a lot about potentially getting that bad news, then I'm also thinking about what I would do if I were to get that bad news, which in turn makes me feel like I am more prepared for potentially getting that bad news. And being anxious about it isn't going to stop it from happening. It's not going to make it so that I don't get bad news from the doctor, but it could help prepare me a little bit for it, or being anxious about something bad happening in general can oftentimes help you imagine what you would do if that bad thing were to happen and how you would handle it, which then will make you more prepared if that bad thing does end up happening. And so sometimes anxiety actually is helpful. Sometimes anxiety actually helps you solve problems or be better prepared for a problem that hasn't happened yet. And so it's really hard to find the line to know when you're being anxious and it's not serving you versus when your anxiety might actually be helping you in some way, if that makes any sense. So anyways, that's all. Thank you so much for watching. Have a great day. Stay frosty. Bye.